Hey, what's up everybody? Tony with Lido, Loca. Welcome to the YouTube channel. Today's video going to be really personal to me. I have a severe phobia about missing the cruise ship before the cruise even starts. I run through all these scenarios in my mind of ways that I can miss the cruise ship, and then what makes them even worse is when you see them play out in real life examples, things that actually happen that you see in the cruise news. I'm going to give you a list of things today that may make you miss your cruise before it even starts. And before we get started, I just want to give you a warm welcome to the Lido, Loca cruising community. My wife and I make YouTube videos. We have a vibrant cruising community over on Facebook. So I'd invite you to subscribe to the videos if you want more cruising content, if you want more tips for cruising, if you want to see people on a cruise, subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you want that sense of community, if you want to get to know other people, join us over at the Lido, Loca cruising community on Facebook. There are links to subscribe to the channel and to come to the Facebook community in the description below. Now let's get to the meat and potatoes. Let's get to these things that might make you miss your cruise. Let's kick it off with a few things that you can't control. So let's talk about mechanical failure of the cruise ship. So a good example of mechanical failure that's been in the news recently is the challenges that the Carnival Vista has had with its propulsion system, with its Asiopods. The ship was unable to make its cruises because it could not get up to maximum cruising speed, and typically repairs of this type would be done while other cruises were going on. Attempts were made to repair the cruise ship, but a decision finally was made that they could not do this while continuing their normal cruise schedule, and 3 cruises on the Carnival Vista had to be canceled so that they could repair the cruise ship. So that's 3 cruises full of passengers that had planned to go on the Carnival Vista that could no longer go on the Vista. So nothing that those folks did. They got an email, they got a phone call and said, guess what? Your cruise is canceled before it even started because of mechanical failure. And mechanical failure is not limited to the cruise ship. You got to get to the cruise port some way. That could be by airplane, it could be by car, and those are more machines that have the potential to break down. On one of our recent group cruises, we were tracking the people that were coming to the cruise ship. These folks weren't part of our group, but we were on a Facebook group, and we saw a horrible story of somebody's car that broke down 2 or 3 hours outside of the cruise port, and they were traveling on the day of the cruise and they missed the cruise. We've also seen mechanical failure happen on airplanes that have caused schedules to be delayed or even canceled, and if that happens on the day of your cruise, you run the risk of missing the cruise ship. I think it's a good time to say that boarding the cruise ship is such a key moment of the cruise vacation. You have to get on the cruise ship. And so we always advocate that if you're traveling to the cruise port, unless you are super close and you know that you're not going to have any problems, if you're within an hour to 2 hours, go to the cruise port the day early. That way, if your plane has mechanical problems, there's time to overcome that. If you're in a car that has mechanical problems, there's time to overcome that. I would really suggest that unless you live very close to the cruise port, travel to the cruise port the day before to eliminate some of the risk of at least plane and car mechanical failure from keeping your cruise from happening. Sometimes the cruise line will cancel cruises as their priorities change. We were scheduled to go on a Royal Caribbean ship in February of 2018, and that ship became part of one of their new initiatives to upgrade their smaller ships. And that happened after we'd booked the cruise. And so a few months before we went on that cruise, we were notified by email that our cruise got canceled and that we could book another Royal Caribbean cruise or that we could get a refund of our deposit. So you just never know what's going to happen. You always got to make sure that you check your email and be mindful that because of changing priorities, things can change with your cruise. I don't think that one happens a lot. And then another example from this year is when the Oasis of the Seas was being repaired at the shipyard in the Bahamas. A crane fell on it, causing cruises to be canceled. So again, you got mechanical failures, you got accidents, you have shifting priorities from the cruise line. All of those things out of your control could actually get your cruise canceled before you even go on it. Another big factor that you can't control that may affect whether or not you can get on your cruise is weather. Something that cruisers should familiarize themselves with is the hurricane season. A good way to remember the hurricane season is to remember the Jason months. Honestly, it should be the Jason months, but starting in June, July, August, September, October, and November, those are the official months where hurricane activity, at least in the Caribbean, is heightened. There is a potential that weather can cancel a cruise. It's happened numerous times where cruise ships have had to stay longer at sea because of a hurricane, where cruises have been completely canceled because of bad weather, or where cruises have been rerouted because of bad weather. Now, the cruise lines do a really great job of changing itineraries. They don't want to miss a cruise. That's a lot of money for them. And so they're going to do everything possible to make sure that your cruise happens. And then the other thing I want to say is they do everything possible to make sure that you're cruising safely. They don't sail into hurricanes. They try to avoid bad weather. And so if you are booked during the Jason months, there's a good chance you're going to cruise, but sometimes the weather will cancel a cruise. Sometimes the weather will alter a cruise. So you want to be mindful of that. A big example that comes to mind is the year when the volcano exploded in Hawaii, and it altered several cruises for at least a couple months that could no longer go to the normal island spots on Hawaii because of this active volcano spewing ash into the atmosphere. While it didn't necessarily cancel cruises, it canceled stops to parts of Hawaii, and it definitely affected cruising. So the weather, nature, can affect your cruise. And then the last thing I'll say about weather is you may be traveling to a cruise port where there is bad weather. So you got to check the weather before your travel, especially if you're driving. You could be hindered from getting to your cruise because of bad weather. And that's one of those scenarios. The weather may necessarily not cancel your cruise, but if it impedes you from getting to the cruise port in a timely fashion, the ship might leave without you. So another thing that you don't have control of is traffic. We do advocate going to the cruise port a day early, and you have to decide how close you want to stay to the cruise port. We've done it several different ways. We've stayed as far away as an hour from the cruise port, and we've stayed as close as a mile to the cruise port. And oddly enough, when we were an hour away, when we were a half an hour away, we didn't have any trouble with traffic at all. But one of the most scary traffic situations that we had on embarkation day was when we were only 1 mile away from the cruise port in Mobile, Alabama. It was interesting. We were using a shuttle service from the hotel to the cruise port, and our shuttle was supposed to pick us up at 11 o'clock. Now the shuttle was there at 10 o'clock for the first group of people. We saw people load up, we saw them go and leave, and then the shuttle wasn't there at 11 o'clock. The shuttle wasn't there at 11:30, and this was our first cruise. It was super scary. The shuttle finally shows up about 11:45, and the guy tells us that there is a train that is essentially blocking the main road to get to the cruise terminal, and because of that blockage, a huge traffic jam has occurred. And so we had to navigate this traffic to get to the cruise port, and when we thought that we would leave the hotel at 11, that we would be at the cruise port at 11:30, that we would be on the cruise ship around 12 o'clock, it just didn't happen that way. There was about an hour and a half delay because of traffic. Fortunately, it didn't impact us getting on the cruise ship, but I tell you what, it was unexpected, and so you got to figure in a little leeway time when you're traveling to the cruise port for traffic, just in case. For me, a good rule of thumb is I would just rather be early sitting at the cruise port than cutting it close. I think that's a good segue to talk about one of those things that you can control: what time you arrive to the cruise port. Now, say you know that your cruise ship is going to leave at 4 p.m. in the afternoon. They do cut off how late you can get to the cruise port before they won't let you on. And usually that's anywhere between an hour and 2 hours before sail away time. So if you know the ship is going to leave at 4 and you think you're just going to get over there at 3:45 and jump on the cruise ship, that's not going to be possible. So if you plan to go to the cruise port later in the afternoon, closer to the sail away time, you want to make sure what the cutoff is, because if you're late for that, they're not going to let you onto the cruise ship. And then relating back to that story about traffic, if you have some grand scheme to try to show up right near the cutoff time and then you get caught in traffic, you run the potential of missing your ship. So I would say if you don't want to go as early as possible, don't go as late as possible either. Find the time in the middle. Say boarding begins at 10 a.m. and the cutoff is 2 o'clock, maybe go at noon. I would always give myself plenty of time to get through that embarkation process, that boarding process, and I never really want to cut it that close. The stress level would get super high for me, but I know sometimes people are running late, but if you have it in your control, I would err on the side of being early opposed to waiting until the last minute. You wait till the last minute, you run right up against that cutoff time, you might miss your cruise ship. Another thing that you have control of is whether or not you have the proper travel documentation. This is one of those things that can end your cruise before it begins. And so as soon as you book a cruise, the thing to do, if you're booking through a travel agent, talk to them about what travel documentation you're going to need for the cruise, or consult the cruise line's website to know exactly what you're going to need for the cruise. Now, many of the cruises that leave out of Florida, for example, are closed loop travel. And closed loop travel is when you leave one US port, visit one or more foreign destinations, and return to the same US port. The documentation requirements for that are less stringent than different kinds of travel. So for closed loop travel, you can use a state issued ID and your official birth certificate. Some cruise lines they need the official birth certificate. Some cruise lines will take copies. Again, it's important to check on that documentation, but you want to make sure things like your driver's license is not expired. If you're using your passport, that your passport is not expired. Some of the ports of call that you go to that require a passport require that your passport be good for the next 6 months. So you need to check things like how valid your documents are, when will they expire, are they official copies, are they readable copies, are they damaged copies. All of those things can come into play and possibly deny you boarding. And then also make sure you keep your travel documentation on you. There's been more than one story of families who have packed their travel documentation into their checked luggage. They've handed that luggage off for it to be taken onto the cruise ship. And then when they actually get to the point where they need their documentation at the check-in, they don't have it, and there's really not any way for anybody to get it, and they've been denied boarding for the cruise ship. So keep your travel documentation on you. It's the most important thing that you need on embarkation day. Make sure it's not expired, make sure it's readable, make sure it's not damaged, and that's a good way to make sure you will not be denied boarding on embarkation day. Another thing that may cause you to miss your cruise before it even starts is illness. The cruise line is on the lookout for people who are sick, and their goal is to make sure that they don't allow sick people on the cruise ship. In the past, cruise lines would have you fill out a health questionnaire. Some cruise lines have done away with the health questionnaire, but the onus is on you to make sure that if you're sick that you do not cruise. I know it's a dicey proposition, especially if you spend a lot of money for your cruise. And I know some people who prior to their cruise a few weeks out will start upping their vitamin intake. They will do different things to make sure they're as healthy as possible. It's one of those things that could easily prevent you from boarding, last minute sickness or being sick getting on the cruise ship. Just know that the cruise line is going to be on the lookout for that, and it's the right thing to do to not cruise sick and put everybody else in jeopardy. And related to health, let me mention pregnancy. Most cruise lines have a rule that say if you are 24 weeks pregnant or more, you cannot cruise. This played out famously last year or the year before when a woman who was beyond 24 weeks pregnant was denied boarding on a Disney cruise ship. Even though her doctor said it was okay, the cruise lines have studied this. They have that 24-week rule for a reason, and they hold to it fast. So if you are pregnant and you know that you're going to be close to that 24 weeks, it's one of those things that you could get questioned about. Make sure that you have your documentation to show that you're not more than 24 weeks pregnant. It's one of those things that you could get questioned about, and you could get denied boarding. Okay, this is the interactive part of the video. Have you ever missed the cruise before it started? Has your cruise ever been canceled as you were waiting to go on it? Leave a comment below. Let's continue the conversation down there. I just want to say a big thanks for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you got some value out of it. If so, please hit that like button. And I've got some more cruising videos popping up on the screen. Make sure you check those out. Again, this is Tony with Lido, Loca. And until the next time, we'll see you on the Lido. Bye.